Imagine opening your eyes and realizing you don't know your name, your story, or why you're where you are. For some, this would be a new beginning. For others, a plunge into the abyss of fear. But what if, in the silence of this confusion, every detail around you began to whisper that something was wrong, that the people around you weren't who they said they were? What if, with every clue you found, it became clear that someone was rewriting your life? This isn't just a story about memory, loss. It's about the courage to face a truth that could destroy everything you thought was real. It's about resilience in the face of insecurity, about the importance of trust and knowing who not to trust. And above all, it's about the struggle to reclaim your own identity when the world seems determined to erase it. Prepare to follow every step of a woman who is forced to combine intelligence, insight, and courage to escape a web of lies. A journey that will test limits, provoke emotions, and make it clear that sometimes the greatest threat isn't forgetting who you are, but discovering. The first sensation was the cold cutting into her skin, as if the sheets didn't have the strength to warm her. Her eyes opened slowly, revealing a white, smooth, and impersonal ceiling. There was no smell of home, no familiar sounds. Her heart raced before she even understood why. She tried to search her mind for something simple, like a name or a familiar face, but found only a deafening void. Panic began to build, mixed with a primal fear that whispered danger. She took a deep breath, trying to grasp any fragment of memory, but nothing came. She got up cautiously, her legs feeling weak, and realized she was in a modest but tidy room, as if someone had prepared everything for her arrival or her imprisonment. Her survival instinct, combined with a resilience she hadn't even known she possessed, made her move slowly, analyzing every detail around her. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the curtains, revealing dust particles dancing in the air. The nightstand held only a half-full glass of water and an analog clock frozen. At 3:17, she knew that small details hold big answers, so she mentally recorded each observation. Deep down, something told her that the key to her identity wouldn't come from spontaneous memories, but from clues left, intentionally or not, by whoever had placed her there. The fear of being alone mixed with intense curiosity and internal conflict that tested her emotional intelligence. She sat on the edge of the bed, trying to organize a plan. She had already learned, somewhere and at a time she couldn't quite pinpoint, that acting without thinking is like walking blindfolded in the middle of a storm. She knew she needed courage to move, but also cunning to avoid attracting the attention of anyone who might be watching. Looking at her hands, she noticed faint scratches and old stains, marks of something recent but inexplicable. The sight awakened a sense of urgency, as if time was against her. And it was in that instant that she decided, before any attempt to escape, she needed to understand where she was and, above all, who she was. But the answers would require risky steps, and the first of them lay just a few meters away. In the cold reflection of a mirror, the woman walked slowly to the mirror, as if approaching her own reflection were an act of courage. The slightly fogged glass revealed a figure she recognized and yet didn't recognize at the same time. Her face, pale and tense, displayed small, almost healed cuts, as if she'd been through something violent. On her neck, a fresh, neatly placed bandage covered a mark she didn't dare touch. Her hair, slightly disheveled, looked hastily washed, and her clothes, a loose gray t-shirt and sweatpants, were ill-fitting, like pieces chosen for personal taste. That image provoked a mixture of insecurity and unease, as if every detail were a whisper of something she should remember. Instinctively, she ran her hand over the bandage, trying to decipher what lay beneath. A shiver ran down her spine. It wasn't just a wound. It was a question mark etched into her very skin. The cut on her neck suggested someone had physically interfered with her, perhaps to hurt her, perhaps to save her, and this ambiguity was what generated the most fear. With every second, she realized that her body carried clues that her mind couldn't yet comprehend. As her own mentor in that moment, she decided to observe as an investigator would, unhurriedly, but without ignoring. The value of small discoveries. The wisdom that emerged from this process was clear. Understanding herself was the first step to any solution. She leaned her forehead against the mirror and closed her eyes, trying to feel something that connected that image to a concrete memory. Nothing, just confused flashes, as if memories were trying to break through a dense fog. When she reopened her eyes, she noticed something almost imperceptible. In the lower corner of the mirror, there was a small chip, as if it had been struck by force. The woman ran her finger over the defect and felt a rough remnant of broken glass. Maybe it was just wear and tear. Or maybe it was another clue, a fragment of a story involving violence or resistance. She felt she needed to explore the rest of the house. Something told her the answers lay not just in the reflection, but in the heavy silence that inhabited that place. She took the first step out of the room and was greeted by an almost suffocating silence. There was no sound of the television on, no footsteps, no wind rattling the windows. Only the distant ticking of a clock, keeping time with almost irritating precision. The hallway was narrow, its walls painted a beige hue that conveyed a false sense of calm. As she walked, she noticed that all the doors were locked except for the one at the end. Opening it, she found an impeccably organized living room, as if it had stepped out of a home decor catalog. However, what really caught her attention were the framed photos scattered across the walls and shelves. She approached the frames, feeling a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. The images depicted different moments: a backyard barbecue, a trip to the beach, a birthday dinner. People smiling, glasses raised, warm hugs. But there was something deeply disturbing about them all. In each photo, she was present, always smiling, always integrated into the group, as if she were part of that life. Yet, none of those people evoked any feelings of affection or recognition in her. It was like looking at someone else's album with her face plastered across every image. It brought a feeling of intense loneliness, as if she were living a borrowed life. She tried to rationalize. Maybe they were just doctored photos. Maybe it was some kind of cruel joke. But the naturalness of the scenes and the apparent sincerity in the smiles made her uneasy. Among the frames, he found a smaller photograph, hidden behind a vase. In it, he was alone, in front of a different house, holding an object he couldn't identify, but which provoked a strange feeling of fear. He stored the image in his mind and realized that if he wanted answers, he would have to look beyond the obvious. It was then that, upon opening a drawer, he found something unexpected: a secret compartment containing a small notebook. The notebook was wrapped in a worn piece of cloth, as if someone had tried to protect it from the elements. Removing it, the woman felt the rough texture of the cover and realized this was no ordinary store-bought diary. The yellowed pages were filled with a firm, familiar handwriting, as if written with determination. Most disturbingly, the handwriting was hers. The first few entries seemed innocent: to-do lists, shopping lists, household reminders. But as she turned the pages, the contents became darker. Disjointed sentences appeared in the middle of banal paragraphs, as if they were urgent messages left for herself. And then she found the sentence that made her heart race: "Don't trust him." There was no signature, no date, no explanation. Just those 4 words, written in capital letters and pressed so hard that they had marked the next page. Who was he? Fear began to mix with a strange sense of understanding. This wasn't just a warning, it was a code for survival. On some pages there were mentions of nocturnal encounters, conversations overheard behind doors, and something about a basement that shouldn't be opened. With each line, the feeling of living a lie intensified. And her resilience was tested. She closed the diary, feeling not only the physical but also the emotional weight of that discovery. If she had truly written those words, then part of her knew everything that was happening, and the amnesia wasn't an accident, but an obstacle placed in her path to prevent her from remembering. The generosity of whoever had cared for her until that point might have been just a facade, a disguise to keep up appearances. As she ran her fingers over the cover, she heard an unexpected sound. The landline phone in the living room began to ring. The sound echoed through the silence of the house like an inevitable call, an invitation to walk through the next door of a labyrinth whose end she still didn't know. The phone continued to ring, each ring like a sharp blow to the chest. The woman hesitated before answering, fearing she would hear a voice she wouldn't recognize. Finally, she picked up the receiver and put it to her ear. On the other end, there was only silence for a few seconds, followed by a low, almost imperceptible breathing. Then, a hoarse voice, charged with urgency, whispered, "They're lying to you. Run now." The impact of those words was like a punch. She tried to ask who was speaking, but the line went dead. Silence filled the space again, this time charged with a tension that made every muscle in her body tense. The warning echoed in her mind, like a mantra impossible to ignore. Who were they, and what were they hiding? The woman felt a mixture of fear and courage, an impulse to act, but also the need to use emotional intelligence to avoid rushing into things. The phone call had made it clear she wasn't alone, and that could mean two things. Someone was willing to help her or manipulate her perception to put her in even more danger. Wisdom said that in situations like these, it's vital to observe, gather information, and not trust blindly. She replaced the receiver and stood still for a few moments, her heart pounding. Then she looked around the room, as if expecting to find cameras or some other sign of surveillance. Nothing in sight. Then she heard a knock on the door. A firm but non-aggressive sound, like someone wanting to be heard but not alarming. She approached cautiously, took a deep breath, and turned the doorknob. Outside, a smiling man stood holding a paper bag. He introduced himself as her neighbor and said he was there to check on her. Doubt immediately invaded her. Was she in front of a friend or just another piece in the game of lies that surrounded her? The man seemed friendly, with a calm tone of voice and gestures that conveyed kindness. He said his name was Patrick and that he had lived next door for years. As he spoke, his eyes roamed the room, as if discreetly assessing every detail. He handed her the bag, saying it contained some muffins he had made that morning. The woman thanked him, but maintained a cautious posture. Although the gesture was an act of generosity, something about his posture aroused discomfort. Perhaps it was the overconfidence with which he entered the conversation, or the fact that he avoided prolonged eye contact. She knew that when insecurity knocks on the door, one must pay attention not only to the words, but also to the silences. She tried to make conversation, asking how they knew each other and if they had any friends in common. Patrick responded vaguely, saying they were good neighbors and that they had shared a few conversations in the backyard. However, he didn't provide details such as dates, places, or specific events. He seemed to be skimming the surface without delving into memories that could be verified. This required a combination of patience and perspicacity, as any abrupt reaction could close doors to important information. She also noticed that he avoided discussing the past, deterring to trivial topics like the weather and minor renovations in the neighborhood. As he said goodbye, leaving the bag on the table, the woman watched through the window as he walked away. Patrick walked slowly, but before entering the house, he glanced discreetly back, as if to confirm something. This reinforced the feeling that he knew more than he was willing to say. As she closed the curtain, she felt a pang of loneliness, but also a surge of perseverance. She needed answers, and trusting strangers didn't seem like the safest course. It was then that, alone in the living room, disconnected flashes began to invade her mind, quick images of a violent argument, a scream, and something heavy falling to the floor. The images appeared abruptly, as if they were pieces of a poorly edited film. First, she saw a dimly lit hallway, then a figure approaching, followed by the muffled sound of a door slamming. Then the scene shifted to a heated argument, but the voices were distorted, impossible to identify. There was fear in those fragments, but also a strange sense of courage, as if part of her had risen up against something or someone. These memories were accompanied by a chill down her spine and a pressure in her chest, as if her body still felt the impact of what had happened. In one of the clearest flashes, she saw blood splattered on the floor and a hand lying motionless. She couldn't see the face, but she knew the scene was directly related to her. The mixture of insecurity and curiosity left her stunned. Was she a victim, a witness, or something worse? The realization that her own history was stained by violence shook her humanity. It was like walking on a frozen lake where each step could reveal an abyss beneath the ice. Perseverance, however, kept her from retreating. If there was something dark in her past, she needed to know. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her heart. She knew that fragmented memories were like loose pieces of a puzzle, useless on their own, but revealing when they fit together. She decided the best way forward would be to explore every corner of that house, searching for clues that might connect the present to the past. The memory of the diary and its notes reinforced the feeling that there was something hidden, something someone wanted to keep from her consciousness. It was at that moment that an almost instinctive thought took shape. What if there was a basement? A place where secrets were not just kept, but forcibly locked away. The idea of a basement seemed too sensible to ignore. She began searching the house until she found, behind a heavy cabinet in the kitchen, a low door with a rusty latch. The cold air escaping through the cracks made her skin crawl. With effort, she managed to open it and descend the wooden steps, which creaked with each step. The room was dimly lit, smelling of dampness and years of accumulated dust. In the center, on a rusty table, sat a metal box locked with a sturdy padlock. It wasn't just any box. It was covered in scratches and small marks, as if someone had tried to force it open in the past. She approached, her heart pounding. She ran her fingers over the cool surface, realizing that the box carried a weight that wasn't just physical. Beside it, she found a small, rusty key, tied with a ribbon to the foot of the table. It was impossible not to think that the key was there on purpose, as if someone wanted her to find it one day. As she opened the padlock, a metallic creak echoed through the basement, heightening the tension. Inside were aged documents, newspaper clippings, and old photographs. All the photos had one thing in common: her face, in different places and situations, including scenes she couldn't remember experiencing. Among the documents was a police file on an unsolved crime. The pages described a homicide case that had occurred years ago, mentioning missing witnesses and suspects who had never been formally charged. And there was her name, highlighted in red. The shock nearly made her drop everything, but something inside her, a mixture of resilience and courage, held her together. It was clear that someone had been recording her life for a long time, controlling what she could and couldn't remember. She closed the box and took a deep breath. If this information was there, then there was a distorted truth being sustained by someone close to her. And the only way to find out was to confront the narrative imposed on her. With the documents and photos spread out on the table, the woman began to connect dots that had previously seemed disconnected. The more she read, the more she realized that the life she remembered, or rather, the few memories she had, was nothing more than a construction. Dates, places, and faces that seemed vague in her mind were, in fact, carefully chosen pieces to form a false story. Someone had manipulated her memories or exploited her amnesia to shape a convenient version of who she was. The initial shock gave way to a quiet determination. The truth could be painful, but living in a lie was an even greater prison. As she reviewed the photos, she noticed that in many of them, Patrick, her curious neighbor, always in the background watching. This couldn't be a coincidence. The diary entries made sense now. "Don't trust him" was more than a warning. It was the key to understanding the entire drama around her. But there was an even more disturbing detail. Among the newspaper clippings, she found an old news story about the murder she'd seen in the documents. One of the witnesses mentioned was a man with Patrick's last name. The connection between them wasn't just circumstantial, it was personal. She took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of fear and courage stir within her. She was about to cross the line between comfortable ignorance and dangerous truth. She knew that confronting Patrick could bring answers, but also risks she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Still, perseverance spoke louder. She packed up the evidence and returned upstairs, feeling each step like a step toward an inevitable outcome. The walls of the house seemed thinner, as if the entire place knew she finally knew too much. And on the near horizon, a confrontation loomed. Night fell, bringing with it a heavy silence. The woman knew Patrick would come, one way or another. She decided not to run away. She strategically arranged the room, leaving the metal box and some of the documents visible on the table. She sat facing the door, feeling the weight of her decision. When the doorbell rang, the sound echoed like a shot in the dark. When she opened it, she found Patrick with that same practiced smile. But this time, there was something different in his gaze, less kindness, more calculation. He entered uninvited, his gaze going straight to the box. There was no more room for politeness as she looked at him and said, with a firmness she didn't even know she possessed, that she knew everything. Patrick laughed, a short, humorless laugh. "Before saying that some stories shouldn't be remembered." The sentence sounded like a veiled confession. With each word, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. He wasn't just a nosy neighbor. He was directly connected to the crime of her past and the control of her present life. Emotions mingled: fear, anger, but also a strange sense of liberation at finally having the truth in front of her. The conversation turned to pure tension. Patrick moved closer, but she stood her ground, positioning herself between him and the box. She said she would no longer live in a lie, that she would rather face danger than remain a prisoner of a fabricated life. His gaze shifted, revealing frustration and perhaps even a hint of respect for her courage. Before she could react, she grabbed the box and walked out the door, feeling the cold night air like a punch of reality. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but she was certain the first step had been taken. And deep down she understood that this wasn't the end, but the beginning of something even more intense. Now that you've walked through every step of this story, tell me, what if it were you? Would you have the courage to question everyone around you, even at the risk of discovering something that would change everything? Or would you prefer to remain in the comfort of lies, where the truth cannot hurt? This story isn't just about a woman with no memory. It's about all of us, about how life sometimes forces us to face fear to achieve freedom. Think about your own life. How many things do you accept without question? How many secrets do you avoid investigating because you fear what you might find? The truth is that there is only overcoming when there is action. There is only transformation when you choose courage over inertia. And above all, there is only reconstruction when you decide to act with honesty, emotional intelligence, and initiative, even if the path is uncertain. If this story has touched you, don't let it be just entertainment. Use it as fuel to seek more, to not accept easy answers, to cultivate resilience and sharpen your acumen. And of course, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because here, each story is an invitation for you to dive deep, question, learn, and who knows, change your own life.